flashbulbs of the Seoul diplomatic ball fired in a relentless, blinding rhythm, turning the golden grand staircase into a sea of artificial lightning. Standing at the center of the mahogany stage, Hwang Do-yul remained the absolute anchor of the room. Immaculate in his tailored navy suit, the billionaire extended a premium dark velvet box with a serenity that belonged to a man who owned the very air people breathed. Resting inside was a teardrop diamond pendant, its platinum setting catching the glow of the massive crystal chandeliers above. The high society crowd gasped in unison, a collective sigh of envy and awe at the public declaration. But Nyasha Dube did not step forward. Wrapped in her own masterpiece, a custom-designed gown featuring a deep crimson giagori jacket that melded seamlessly into a striking geometric kente patterned skirt, Nyasha felt the world tilt. Her posture turned rigid. Instead of leaning into the fortune being offered, her heel clicked sharply against the marble floor as she stepped backward. A single, heavy tear cut a visible path through her flawless makeup, her lips parting in a silent, suffocating panic. To the elite audience, it looked like the overwhelming joy of a modern Cinderella. To Nyasha, the diamond felt like a beautifully crafted noose. She knew the brutal math of this world. A gift this immense from South Korea's most eligible bachelor didn't just elevate her, it painted a permanent target on her back, inviting an avalanche of scrutiny onto her outsider status and her body. Do-yul's gentle, steady gaze remained fixed on her, his face wearing a faint, confident smile. Safe behind the wall of his elite, stoic bodyguards, he was entirely detached from the emotional storm raging beneath her vibrant gown. He truly believed his wealth was a shield that could protect her from anything. He was wrong. Just beyond the perimeter of the security detail, framed perfectly in the golden mid-ground of the ballroom, stood Vivienne Drake. Nyasha's supposedly fiercely loyal best friend wasn't gasping or applauding. Vivienne's eyes were narrowed into razor-sharp slits, her jaw locked so tight the muscle twitched beneath her skin. As she glared at the teardrop diamond gleaming in the velvet box, the toxic envy she had masked for years finally broke through her porcelain facade. Vivienne didn't see a friend being honored. She saw a plus-sized woman who didn't belong here stealing the life, the spotlight, and the billionaire that should have been hers. As the applause swelled to a deafening roar, Vivienne slowly slipped her hand into her beaded clutch, her mind already spinning a web of financial and social ruin. The countdown had begun, and the ultimate betrayal was already taking shape in the shadows. The heavy oak doors of the private holding suite shut out the roar of the gala, but the silence inside felt just as suffocating. Nyasha stood by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the glittering Seoul skyline, her chest rising and falling in shallow, jagged breaths. The crimson giagori of her gown felt suddenly constricting, the structured kente skirt heavy against her legs. On the marble vanity table sat the dark velvet box. Even under the dim, ambient lights of the suite, the teardrop diamond seemed to hum with an predatory brightness. Hwang Do-yul unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket, his movements fluid and entirely unbothered. He approached her with a serene, measured stride, the very picture of a man who had successfully executed a flawless masterstroke. He reached out, his hand gently resting on her rigid shoulder. "You did beautifully, Nyasha," he murmured, his voice a low, soothing cadence. "The board, the press, the foreign ministers, they were completely captivated by you. Your design is the only thing anyone will be talking about tomorrow." Nyasha closed her eyes, a bitter laugh dying in her throat. "Do-yul, you don't understand," she whispered, turning to face him, her hands wrapped around her own elbows, a defensive shield against the room's oppressive opulence. The look in their eyes out there, it wasn't just admiration. They were dissecting me. A plus-sized black woman from across the world, suddenly handed the crown jewels by South Korea's favorite son. The press won't just talk about my clothes. They are going to tear my life apart. Do-yul frowned slightly, a faint line forming between his handsome brows. He looked at her, but his eyes held the clinical detachment of a man analyzing a minor corporate setback. He reached for the velvet box, lifting the diamond so it caught the light. "Let them talk. This necklace is an ironclad statement. It tells the world exactly where you stand, beside me. There is no need to be overwhelmed by the spotlight. Shyness is natural, but you must realize you are safe now." Shyness, the word hung in the air like a physical insult. He thought this was stage fright. He genuinely believed that his billions had purchased a sanctuary, completely blind to the fact that his grand gesture had actually locked her inside a golden cage. He couldn't see the invisible glass walls closing in on her or the wolves waiting just outside the perimeter. And worst of all, he had absolutely no idea that the most dangerous predator of all was the one currently waiting for her in the dressing room. The sanctuary of the hotel dressing room offered no relief, only a shifting of the cage. Nyasha sank into the plush velvet chair, her hands trembling as she began unpinning the intricate braids of her hair. The heavy diamond necklace sat on the vanity before her, reflecting the harsh, clinical light of the makeup mirror. The door clicked open, and Vivienne stepped inside, shedding her evening wrap with a practiced elegance that instantly altered the room's oxygen. "Oh, sweetie," Vivienne purred, rushing forward to drape her arms over Nyasha's shoulders. In the mirror, her smile was a masterclass in performative empathy, though her eyes remained locked on the teardrop diamond. "I came as fast as I could. I saw you shaking out there. Honestly, my heart broke for you." Nyasha let out a ragged breath, leaning into the familiar comfort of her childhood friend. "It was too much, Vive. Do-yul thinks it's just stage fright, but the way those people looked at me, I felt like an exhibit." Vivienne's hands tightened subtly on Nyasha's shoulders, her thumbs massaging the tense muscles with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. "And you have every right to feel that way," Vivienne whispered, her voice dropping to a soothing, toxic frequency. "Do-yul means well, but he's entirely blind. He doesn't see what everyone else sees. Sweetie, look at this room. Look at his world. It's built on old money, hyper-fixated aesthetics, and rigid family dynasties. You're a brilliant designer, yes, but you're a plus-sized black woman in a society that treats conformity like a religion." Nyasha looked up at her reflection, the words hitting her rawest insecurities with surgical precision. "They are never going to accept you, Nyasha," Vivienne continued, her tone dripping with artificial sorrow as she picked up the velvet box. "To them, you're just an exotic novelty Do-yul brought home, a charity project to make him look progressive. Every headline tomorrow is going to dissect your weight, your skin, your background. Do-yul can buy you 1,000,000 diamonds, but he can't buy you their respect. You'll always be an outsider trying to force her way into a world where she doesn't fit." Nyasha flinched, pulling away from the touch as the venom seeped deep into her chest, paralyzing her defenses. She didn't see the triumphant flash in Vivienne's narrowed eyes. She didn't realize that her best friend wasn't protecting her from the wolves. She was merely softening the prey before the strike. Over the next 3 days, the penthouse suite was transformed into a glittering archive of high-end consumerism. Gilded clothing racks arrived hourly, heavy with silk satin blouses and bespoke blazers bearing the crests of Europe's most exclusive fashion houses. Crates of vintage champagne sat on the marble counters, and towering arrangements of white orchids crowded the living space. Hwang Do-yul believed in the absolute calculus of luxury. If a diamond necklace had caused a rift, then an avalanche of elegance would surely repair it. He remained entirely unaware that his overwhelming wealth was creating a profound emotional chasm between them and providing the perfect ammunition for a predator. Nyasha walked through the maze of silk and gold, feeling more isolated than ever. Each new delivery felt less like a gift and more like a gilded brick, reinforcing the walls of her confinement. Do-yul's pride wouldn't allow him to see that she didn't want his money, she wanted his understanding. "Look at all of this," Vivienne whispered, stepping into the suite with an iPad tucked tightly under her arm. Her eyes swept over the newly arrived designer inventory, cataloging the sheer value with cold, mathematical precision. "He really thinks he can buy your comfort, doesn't he? It's almost insulting. He's treating your anxiety like a bill that needs to be settled." Nyasha sighed, running a hand over a rack of cashmere coats. "He thinks he's protecting me, Vive. He just doesn't get it." "Exactly, he doesn't get it, and he never will," Vivienne said, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur as she opened a spreadsheet on her screen. "But while he's playing the grand savior, someone needs to protect your actual business. The paperwork for your upcoming Afro-Korean fusion launch is a mess, Nyasha. Do-yul's legal team is trying to absorb your intellectual property under his corporate umbrella. If you sign his standard agreements, you lose your brand forever." Nyasha looked at her friend, her judgment clouded by exhaustion and the heavy fog of her own insecurities. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Vive." "You don't have to worry," Vivienne smiled, a masterclass in supportive loyalty. "Just grant me temporary power of attorney over the supply chain accounts. I'll ensure your fabric suppliers in West Africa and your manufacturers here in Seoul are insulated from his corporate takeover." Nyasha nodded numbly, signing the digital authorization without reading the fine print. She had no idea that Vivienne had just systematically routed her entire production line into a shell company controlled entirely by herself. Do-yul's blind pride had created the distraction, and Vivienne had just pulled the trigger on a financial execution. The music pulsing through the grand atrium of the Seoul Design Center was a brilliant tapestry of traditional Korean gyugak rhythms and heavy West African percussion. On the runway, models glided in breathtaking creations, structural kente cloth bodices tapering into flowing silk chima skirts, and deep crimson giagori jackets embroidered with bold geometric tribal patterns. It was the physical manifestation of Nyasha's soul, a triumphant fusion of her dual worlds. For a fleeting hour, the applause felt real, and the heavy weight of the diamond necklace hidden beneath her collar seemed to lift. But the celebration died before the final model could even exit the stage. A sudden, collective murmur rippled through the front row of the elite audience, the bright screens of 100 smartphones illuminating faces that instantly turned cold. Nyasha stepped backstage, her heart hammering against her ribs as she saw her design assistants huddled over a tablet in frantic whispers. Vivienne was already there, her face a carefully constructed mask of sheer horror. "Nyasha, oh my God, don't look at the news," Vivienne gasped, shoving the tablet forward anyway. The headlines from South Korea's most notorious tabloid sites were devastating, spreading like wildfire across social media. The Imperial Opportunist, leaked documents reveal plus-sized foreign designer schemed to entrap Hwang Do-yul for brand funding. The articles featured anonymous, highly specific leaks detailing Do-yul's private financial backing, twisted text messages taken entirely out of context, and fabricated financial statements painting Nyasha as a ruthless gold digger who had weaponized her outsider status to guilt the billionaire into submission. Within minutes, the narrative of her breakthrough fashion line was completely erased. The comment sections descended into an avalanche of cruel, xenophobic, and body-shaming vitriol, tearing down her weight, her skin, and her talent. Buyers from major luxury department stores who had been praising her moments ago began quietly slips out of the atrium, their assistants already emailing cancellation notices to her press team. Nyasha's breath caught in her throat, the walls of the dressing room closing in on her as her entire life's work dissolved into digital ash. She felt completely naked, utterly exposed to a world that had just validated her worst fears. She looked to Vivienne for comfort, entirely blind to the fact that the anonymous emails containing those heavily edited files had been sent from Vivienne's private device less than an hour before the show began. The whispers had started, and the trap was snapping shut. Glass walls of the high-security monitoring hub on the top floor of the Hwang Corporation Tower glowed with the cold light of a dozen active data matrices. While the city below slept, Min-yi, Do-yul's stoic head of security, stood completely motionless behind a technician's chair. His sharp eyes tracked the cascading lines of red alert code pulsing across the central display. For years, his sole directive had been to eliminate any threat to the billionaire's empire before it could materialize. He had treated Nyasha's sudden elevation with his typical silent skepticism, but the chaotic fallout from the fashion show media leaks had forced him to deploy his elite cybersecurity team. The technician's fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, isolating a ghost protocol that had been systematically draining data from Nyasha's private design server. "We caught the secondary transmission, sir," the technician reported, his voice low and precise. "A massive digital data breach. Over 40 gigabytes of encrypted intellectual property, proprietary fabric supply routes, and manipulated private messages were just packaged for export to a rival corporate house in Tokyo. The source isn't an outside hacker. It's an administrative account utilizing a temporary power of attorney signature." Min-yi leaned forward, his face remaining an unreadable mask of stone as the system decrypted the digital signature. The high-end rim lighting of the server racks highlighted the sharp contours of his jaw. He had expected a corporate espionage ring or a tabloid syndicate. Instead, the tracker bypassed the layers of anonymizers and locked onto a highly specific, static IP address, routing directly through a premium VPN paid for by a personal account. The name popped onto the screen in stark, unforgiving white text: Vivienne Drake. A comprehensive data trail unfurled beneath her name, detailing the systematic financial execution she had been orchestrating from the very beginning. It showed the creation of the shell companies, the rerouted supply lines, and the exact timestamp of the anonymous email that had destroyed Nyasha's runway debut just hours prior. It was a calculated, venomous campaign of absolute ruin born from pure malice. Minnie stood up straight, adjusting the lapels of his dark suit. He didn't offer a single word of surprise or emotion. To a man trained in high-stakes security, betrayal was merely a variable to be neutralized. He pulled an encrypted satellite phone from his pocket and dialed a direct line. "Sir," Minnie said coldly as Do-yul answered. "The shadow behind the suit has a face. It's not the media, and it's not the board. The threat is sitting right inside Miss Dube's dressing room." The rain lashed violently against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nyasha's private studio, casting fractured, distorted shadows across the bolts of uncut silk. Vivienne leaned against a cutting table, her performed empathy completely discarded, replaced by a cold, predatory arrogance. The mask was entirely off. On her phone screen, a folder of heavily altered private journals, medical histories, and vulnerable audio notes from Nyasha's past glowed like a loaded weapon. Realizing that the public media leaks hadn't driven a permanent wedge between Nyasha and Do-yul, Vivienne had chosen to bypass subtlety entirely, escalating the psychological warfare to a direct execution. "It's very simple, sweetie," Vivienne said, her voice dropping to a smooth, venomous purr that made the skin on Nyasha's arms crawl. "You're going to announce a sudden, indefinite medical leave. You'll sign over the remaining equity of the Afro-Korean fusion brand to my logistics company, pack your bags, and catch the first flight out of Seoul tonight." Nyasha backed away until the edge of the display desk pressed hard into her waist, her chest heaving as she stared at her lifelong friend. "Vivienne, why are you doing this to me? I trusted you with everything. I loved you like a sister." "And that was your first mistake," Vivienne laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that cut through the drumming of the rain. "You actually thought you belonged in this world. Look at you, Nyasha. You're a plus-sized outsider trying to play the part of a high-society queen, pretending that South Korea's most eligible billionaire actually sees you as an equal. You don't fit the mold, and you never will. If you don't sign the transfer documents by midnight, I will release this file to every major network. The media will paint you as a deeply unstable, manipulative fraud who weaponized her insecurities to trap a wealthy man. Your reputation will be utterly erased globally, and Do-yul's family will ensure you spend the next 5 years in a Korean prison for corporate defamation." Nyasha felt the room spin, the air turning to ice in her lungs. The sheer weight of her own lingering self-doubt and imposter syndrome rose up like a tidal wave, threatening to swallow her whole. Vivienne was weaponizing her deepest, most intimate vulnerabilities, turning her own history into a noose. If she fought back, she risked total public destruction. If she submitted, she would lose her soul. The ultimatum hung in the suffocating air, a lethal trap designed to break her spirit once and for all. The trembling in Nyasha's fingers did not stop, but the nature of the tremor shifted. For years, Vivienne's voice had acted as a funhouse mirror, distorting Nyasha's reflection until she saw only lack, only unworthiness, and only a woman who should be grateful for the crumbs of a performative friendship. But as Vivienne stood amid the uncut silk, her face twisted in a sneer of absolute malice, the mirror shattered. Looking at her lifelong friend, Nyasha didn't see an untouchable mastermind. She saw a desperate, hollow parasite whose entire power depended on keeping her prey small. Instead of shedding a tear, Nyasha let out a slow, unshakable breath. She looked Vivienne dead in the eye, her posture straightening until she dominated the space beneath the studio lights. "No," Nyasha said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "I won't be signing anything." Before Vivienne could unleash another volley of venom, the heavy glass doors of the studio slid open. Hwang Do-yul stepped into the room, followed closely by the silent, imposing shadow of Min-yi. Do-yul did not look at Vivienne. His serene, razor-sharp gaze was locked entirely on Nyasha, acknowledging the fierce, unbroken dignity in her stance. An hour earlier, Nyasha had bypassed her pride and her fear, walking straight into Do-yul's office to lay bare her vulnerabilities. She had confided entirely in him, not as a victim seeking a savior, but as a partner declaring war on a shared enemy. She had handed him the fragments of her past that Vivienne sought to weaponize, choosing radical transparency over shame. In that moment, Do-yul's clinical detachment had evaporated, replaced by a cold, protective fury. Now he stood beside her, uniting his immense elite resources with her emotional resilience. Min-yi stepped forward, placing a sleek encrypted tablet on the cutting table. On the screen, a live federal freezing order on Vivienne's personal accounts and shell companies blinked in stark digital ink, alongside a complete forensic dossier of her digital espionage. "Your midnight deadline is irrelevant, Miss Drake," Do-yul said, his voice carrying the terrifying weight of absolute financial dominance. "Every file on your device has already been intercepted, mirrored, and legally neutralized by my security team. You have spent years trying to convince Nyasha she doesn't fit into my world." Nyasha stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with the billionaire, her presence unshakable. "But the truth is, Vivienne," Nyasha whispered, "you're the one who no longer has a place here." The grand auditorium of the Seoul Exhibition Center hummed with a fierce, electric energy as the International Fashion Showcase reached its zenith. Beneath the massive crystal chandeliers, a global audience of elite buyers, foreign dignitaries, and sharp-eyed journalists watched a parade of unyielding beauty. Models commanded the runway in Nyasha's final collection, a majestic crescendo of sweeping kente train wraps and structured, gold-embroidered giagori jackets. The designs were bold, unapologetic, and fiercely regal, mirroring the internal transformation of the woman who made them. But behind the scenes, a different kind of theater was playing out. Driven by a toxic cocktail of financial ruin and absolute desperation, Vivienne slipped past the secondary press barrier, a counterfeit VIP badge clutched tightly in her trembling hand. Her personal accounts were frozen, her reputation was in tatters, and her shell companies were compromised, leaving her with only one manic objective: a final, public execution of Nyasha's character on a global stage. Snaking her way toward the main technical booth, she intended to override the central projection screens and broadcast the heavily distorted, private audio files of Nyasha's past directly to the world's media. Vivienne reached the console, her face twisting into a manic smile of impending triumph as she jammed her flash drive into the terminal. "Enjoy your final curtain call, sweetie," she muttered under her breath. But the screens didn't flash with scandal. Instead, the console lights turned a solid, unforgiving crimson. Before Vivienne could pull the drive, the steel-reinforced doors of the booth locked with a heavy, automated click. The shadows shifted, and Min-yi stepped into the light, flanked by 4 stoic, dark-suited security guards. Vivienne staggered back, her chest heaving as she realized the terminal she had accessed was a closed honeypot loop, a digital cage designed specifically for her. Down on the runway, the music faded into a powerful, rhythmic drumbeat as Nyasha stepped out to take her bow. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Hwang Do-yul, who watched her with uncharacteristic, overt pride, Nyasha looked directly toward the glass-fronted technical booth. She didn't offer a look of pity or anger, only the cool, detached gaze of a woman who had completely outmaneuvered her oppressor. Backed by Do-yul's ironclad security force, Nyasha had turned her own high-stakes showcase into the ultimate trap. Vivienne's public ambush had ended before it could even begin, leaving the parasite trapped in the dark while the queen claimed the light. Side doors of the auditorium opened quietly, allowing Min-yi and his guards to lead a completely shattered Vivienne out into the waiting rain, her wrists obscured by a heavy coat. The legal and social execution of Vivienne Drake was absolute. With her digital espionage fully documented and handed to federal prosecutors, her name was already being scrubbed from the luxury industry. She was leaving the building not as a high society player, but as a cautionary tale of toxic hubris. The parasite was gone, and the space she left behind felt suddenly clean, filled only with the lingering warmth of the global applause. The elite crowd slowly drifted toward the grand reception hall, leaving the main stage bathed in a serene, golden aura. Standing center stage beneath the massive, glowing crystal chandeliers, Nyasha looked down at the empty runway. The vibrant kente patterns and deep burgundy silks of her final design caught the warm light, a physical testament to a vision that could no longer be compromised. Hwang Do-yul stepped forward, breaking his usual cool, composed posture to close the distance between them. In his hands, he held the dark velvet box. He opened it, revealing the flawless teardrop diamond pendant gleaming against its platinum setting. "You belong in the light, Nyasha," Do-yul murmured, his gentle gaze steady and entirely stripped of its former clinical detachment. He no longer viewed her through the lens of a corporate strategist or a detached savior. He saw a formidable peer, an unshakable force who had conquered her own shadows. Nyasha smiled, a soft, radiant expression that held no trace of the panic or distress that had plagued her days ago. She didn't pull back. She didn't take a defensive step away from the wealth or the scrutiny it promised. Instead, she stood tall, her posture completely regal as she turned her back to him, lifting the heavy weight of her braids. Do-yul carefully draped the platinum chain around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin as he fastened the clasp. The diamond rested perfectly against her collarbone, a brilliant flare of fire catching the overhead chandeliers. When she turned back to face him, the necklace no longer looked like a golden cage or a target painted on her back. It was a crown of her own making, a symbol of a partnership built on absolute transparency and mutual respect. Standing beside the country's most powerful bachelor, the plus-sized Black Queen was no longer afraid of the world's gaze. She was completely unshakable.